My son took my car keys out of my hand like I was a child and dropped them into his pocket without even blinking. Then Derek looked me straight in the face standing in my own kitchen and said, "Mom, you're helpless now. You shouldn't be driving and you definitely shouldn't be handling things alone." I thought that was the cruelest part until he lowered his voice and asked almost too quickly, "Have you been in the garage lately?" In that moment, I knew this wasn't about my safety. My son wasn't trying to protect me. He was looking for something. If this opening touched a nerve, I'd love for you to stay with me. Like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, what would you feel if your own child spoke to you that way? And please tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. Sometimes it helps to know we're not alone in these moments. I used to think I had done something right as a mother. For most of my life, I believed that if you raised your child with patience, discipline, and love, you would eventually be repaid not with money or favors, but with respect. Not admiration, but kindness. I didn't expect Derek to take care of me. I just expected him to see me as the same woman who had raised him. That belief didn't disappear all at once. It faded slowly like the color of an old photograph left too long in the sun. After my husband Walter passed away 3 years ago, I stayed in the same house we had built together in Columbus. It wasn't grand, but it was ours, every corner of it shaped by shared decisions, shared arguments, shared laughter. I knew where everything was. I knew how everything worked. I knew who I was inside those walls. For a while, Derek was attentive. He started coming by more often. At first, it felt like comfort. He'd bring groceries, fix a loose cabinet hinge, change a light bulb before I even noticed it had gone out. He'd stand in the doorway of the kitchen, leaning against the frame the way he used to as a teenager, and say, "Just making sure you're okay, Mom." And I believed him. Heather. His wife always came with a careful smile, polite, measured, never quite warm. She had a way of speaking that made everything sound reasonable even when it wasn't. She would sit across from me at the table, hands folded neatly, and say things like, "Lucille, you've done so much already. You deserve to make things easier for yourself now. Easier." That word started appearing more often. "Maybe you don't need to keep all these old files. Maybe it's time to simplify things a little. Maybe a smaller place would be less to manage." It all sounded so gentle, so thoughtful. And yet there was always something underneath it I couldn't quite name. It wasn't concern, it was assessment. They weren't looking at me. They were looking at my life like it was something that needed to be reorganized. At first I told myself I was imagining things. Grief does that, I thought. It makes you sensitive, suspicious. It makes ordinary conversations feel heavier than they are. But then I started noticing what Derek paid attention to. He didn't ask me how I was sleeping. He didn't ask me if I missed Walter. He asked about my accounts. "Mom, are you still using that same bank? You know there are better options now." He asked about the house. "Have you thought about what you do with this place long term?" He asked about the car. "You're still driving regularly, right? Just being careful." And every once in a while, his eyes would drift past me, past the kitchen window toward the back of the property, toward the garage. It wasn't a large garage, but it stood separate from the house, just like Walter had always insisted. He used to say he liked having a little distance between the work and the living. I used to tease him about it. Now I understood it differently. That garage had always been Walter's space. He spent hours in there, even in his later years. I'd see the light on through the small window at night, a soft yellow glow against the dark. Sometimes I'd bring him a cup of coffee and just stand in the doorway watching him work with his hands, methodical, focused, at peace. He didn't talk much about what he was doing in there, not because he was hiding anything, but because that was his rhythm. He liked to finish things before he explained them. After he died, I closed the garage and left it that way. Not because I couldn't go in, because I wasn't ready. The last time I had tried about a month after the funeral, I had barely made it past the door. The smell of oil and wood and old metal hit me all at once, and it felt like stepping into a room where someone was supposed to be but wasn't. I had turned around and locked it again without touching a single thing. Derek knew that, which is why at first I didn't think much of it when he mentioned it casually. "Still haven't gotten around to cleaning out the garage, huh?" He had said it one afternoon, standing by the back door, glancing out as if it were just another chore on a long list. I shook my head. Not yet. He nodded, but there was a pause just long enough to notice. "Well, it might be easier if I helped you with that." Easier. That word again. "I'll get to it when I'm ready," I said gently. "Of course," he replied, too quickly. That was the first time something inside me tightened. Not fear. Not yet. Just a quiet, uncomfortable awareness that the conversation wasn't really about cleaning. Over the next few months, the garage came up again. Not often, not directly, but enough. Heather would say, "It must be hard having so many things to sort through." Derek would add, "Some of that stuff could be worth something, Worth something. That was new. Walter had never talked about the garage in terms of value. To him, it was about work, craft, patience. Whatever was in there, it mattered, but not because of money. At least that's what I had always believed. Then about 2 weeks before Derek took my keys, I found myself standing at the kitchen sink when I heard them talking outside. They thought I couldn't hear them. The back door was slightly open, just enough for their voices to slip through. "We can't just leave it sitting there," Derek was saying, his voice low but tense. Heather responded quieter. "Then what do you want to do?" "You know she's not ready." "She doesn't have to be ready," he snapped. Then after a pause, he lowered his voice. "We just need access." My hands froze in the soapy water. "Access to what?" Heather sighed. "Derek. If you push too hard, she's going to notice. She already notices everything," he said. "That's the problem." There was silence after that. Heavy, unfinished. I stepped away from the sink before they came back in, my heart beating just a little faster than it should have. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying that one word in my mind. Access. Not help. Not support. Access. And for the first time since Walter died, I thought about the garage not as a place of memory, but as a place of importance, maybe even of risk. A few days later, while I was going through some of Walter's old papers in the hallway cabinet, I found something I had forgotten. A small note written in his handwriting tucked between 2 folders. It wasn't long, just a single sentence. "Lucy, don't let anyone rush you with the garage. Not even him. Not even him." Walter had never written like that. Not about Derek. I sat there for a long time, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. At the time, I told myself it didn't mean anything, that it was just Walter being cautious the way he always was with his projects. But now, standing in my kitchen replaying the moment Derek took my keys and called me helpless, that sentence came back to me with a weight I couldn't ignore. Not even him. I looked out the window toward the garage, the late afternoon light stretching across the yard, the structure sitting there as quietly as it always had. For years I had avoided it because it hurt too much. Now I had a different reason. Because whatever was inside that garage, my son needed it badly enough to take my independence away to get it. And I had the sinking feeling that I was the only thing standing between him and whatever he thought belonged to him. It's a strange thing being slowly rewritten in your own life. Not in big obvious ways, not with dramatic declarations or shouting matches, but in small careful edits. A sentence here, a suggestion there, until one day you realize the story being told about you no longer matches the person you know yourself to be. That's how it began, not with Derek taking my keys, but with a pair of reading glasses. I had gone to the grocery store on a quiet Tuesday morning. It was the same store I had been going to for years. I knew which aisles were wider, which cashier moved fastest, which brand of soup Walter used to like when he wasn't feeling well. Somewhere between the produce section and the checkout line, I misplaced my glasses. It happens. At 67, I've learned to accept small inconveniences with grace. I finished shopping paid and only realized they were missing when I got back to the car. I retraced my steps, found them sitting on a shelf next to a display of canned peaches, and went home. That was it. A minor inconvenience. A forgettable moment. Until Derek heard about it. I mentioned it casually over dinner that week more as a joke than anything else. You wouldn't believe it, I said, smiling. I walked halfway across the store before I realized I couldn't read a single label. Heather gave a polite laugh. Derek didn't. He leaned back in his chair watching me in a way that made me suddenly aware of how I was sitting, how I was speaking, how I was being seen. You forgot your glasses, he asked. I misplaced them, I corrected gently. And I found them right after. He nodded slowly, but there was something behind his eyes, something calculating. Still, he said, that's the kind of thing we need to keep an eye on. That word landed heavier than I expected. It was just a moment I replied. It happens to everyone. Maybe he said. Or maybe it's the start of something we shouldn't ignore. Heather shifted slightly beside him, placing her hand lightly on the table. Lucille, she said softly, we're not saying anything is wrong. We just want to be proactive. Proactive. Another one of those words. Words that sound helpful but carry a quiet authority beneath them. I smiled because that's what you do when you're not ready to argue. I appreciate that. But I'm fine. Derek didn't argue further that night. He didn't have to, because from that moment on the narrative had begun. A week later, he called me in the afternoon. Hey, Mom, you didn't answer my call this morning. I was in the shower, I said. I called you back. Yeah, but you didn't pick up right away. I blinked confused. I was drying my hair. There was a pause. Okay, he said slowly. Just making sure. Making sure of what the questions didn't come all at once. They came in pieces. Did you remember to take your medication today? I don't take daily medication, I reminded him. Right, he said. Just checking. Another time he stopped by unannounced and noticed a stack of unopened mail on the counter. You haven't gone through this yet. I just brought it in this morning. He picked up an envelope, turning it over as if it were evidence. You used to be more on top of things, Mom. Used to be. It was always subtle, always framed as concern. But it started to build. Heather began adding her own observations. I've noticed you seem more tired lately. Sometimes you repeat stories. Maybe we should schedule a checkup just to be safe. Each comment on its own was harmless. Together they formed a picture I didn't recognize, but one they seemed determined to paint. And the worst part? For a brief time, I let it affect me. I started second-guessing myself. When I walked into a room and forgot why I wondered if it was something more. When I paused mid-sentence to find the right word, I noticed the silence that followed, too long, too watchful. I began to feel like I was being observed, measured, judged. not as a person but as a problem. One afternoon, I overheard Derek on the phone in the backyard again. I wasn't trying to listen, but his voice carried through the open window. "I'm telling you, it's getting worse," he was saying. A pause. "No, she won't admit it. They never do." My chest tightened. They never do. He wasn't talking about me as his mother. He was talking about me as a category, a case. I stepped away from the window before I could hear more, my hands trembling slightly. That night I sat at the kitchen table long after the house had gone quiet, staring at the reflection of myself in the darkened window. I tried to see what they saw. Was I slower, more forgetful, less capable? I thought about the past few months, the small mistakes, the missed moments. And then I thought about the years before that, decades of managing a household, a career guiding teenagers through some of the most confusing years of their lives, balancing budgets, making decisions, holding everything together. Did all of that disappear because I misplaced a pair of glasses, or was something else happening? The next morning I made a decision. Not a loud one, not a dramatic one, just a quiet shift in how I paid attention. I stopped brushing off the little things. I started noticing patterns. Derek calling more frequently, but always with questions that framed me as forgetful. Heather visiting, but steering every conversation toward simplifying, reducing, handing things over. And most importantly, I noticed how often the conversation circled back to the same places. The house, the accounts, the car, and the garage. Always the garage. One evening, Derek came by with takeout. We sat in the living room, the television on low, the kind of comfortable silence that used to feel natural between us. Halfway through dinner, he set his container aside and looked at me. "Mom," he said, "have you thought any more about the garage?" There it was again. I kept my expression neutral. "Not really." He nodded as if he expected that answer. "It's just, there's probably a lot in there that could be useful," he said carefully. "Things you don't even realize." Useful. Not meaningful. Not sentimental. Useful. "I know what's in there," I replied. "Do you?" He asked, his tone light but his eyes sharp. I met his gaze. "Your father's things." He smiled slightly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Exactly," he said. "And some of those things might be worth something, especially if they've been sitting untouched all this time." Worth something. There it was again. The shift from memory to money, from legacy to leverage. "I'll go through it when I'm ready," I said, keeping my voice steady. Derek leaned back, studying me. "I just don't want it to become overwhelming for you," he said. "You know, dealing with all that alone. Alone." Another carefully chosen word, as if being alone automatically meant being incapable. "I've handled bigger things," I said quietly. For a moment, something flickered across his face, irritation maybe, or impatience. Then it was gone, replaced by that familiar calm. "Of course you have," he said. "We're just here to help. That word again. But this time it didn't sound like support. It sounded like a strategy. Later that night after Derek left, I walked through the house, slowly turning off lights, checking locks, moving through rooms that had once felt like certainty and now felt like something else. Something watched. Something measured. When I reached the back door, I paused. The yard stretched out before me, quiet and still under the soft glow of the porch light. And there at the edge of the property sat the garage. Unchanged. Closed. Waiting. For years I had avoided it because it held too much of Walter. Now I understood it held something else. Something Derek wanted badly enough to reshape the truth about me, something important enough to turn a son into someone I was beginning not to recognize. I stood there for a long time, my hand resting lightly on the doorframe, my mind turning over everything I had seen, everything I had heard. Then slowly, I made up my mind. Whatever was in that garage, I needed to see it for myself, before my son decided he had the right to take it. The next morning, I didn't wait for courage. If I had, I might have lost it. Instead, I moved before doubt had time to catch up with me. I made my coffee the same way I always did. 2 spoons of sugar, a splash of cream, set the cup on the kitchen counter, and stood there for a moment longer than necessary, staring at the back door. The garage sat just beyond the yard, quiet, and still exactly where it had always been. But it didn't feel the same anymore. For 3 years, that building had been a place I avoided because it hurt too much. It held the last traces of Walter's daily life, his routines, his unfinished projects, his presence frozen in time. Now it felt like something else entirely. A question, a warning, maybe even a test. I picked up my coffee and stepped outside. The air was crisp, the kind that makes you feel more awake than you want to be. Each step across the yard felt heavier than it should have, as if I were walking toward something I already knew would change everything. When I reached the garage door, I hesitated, not out of fear, out of memory. I could still see Walter standing there wiping his hands on an old cloth, smiling in that quiet way of his. Careful, he used to say whenever I stepped too close to his workspace. There's more order in here than it looks like. I used to laugh at that. Now I understood. I unlocked the door and pushed it open slowly. The smell hit me first. Oil, wood, metal, familiar grounding, and painful all at once. It wrapped around me like a memory I hadn't given myself permission to revisit. For a moment, I stood in the doorway, unable to move. It was exactly as he had left it. The workbench was still lined with tools, each one placed with intention. Shelves held neatly labeled boxes. Old rags hung from a hook on the wall. Even the small radio Walter used to listen to was sitting in the same spot, silent, but somehow still present. Nothing had been disturbed. Nothing had been touched. Except by time. Dust had settled over everything in a thin, even layer, softening the edges of the room. It didn't feel abandoned. It felt paused, as if Walter had simply stepped out for a moment and might return at any second. I took a slow breath and stepped inside. My shoes echoed lightly against the concrete floor, the sound sharper than I expected in the stillness. I moved carefully, instinctively, respecting the space the way I always had when Walter was alive. I ran my fingers along the edge of the workbench, leaving a faint trail through the dust. You should have told me, I whispered, though I wasn't sure what I meant. Maybe I did. Maybe he had. I just hadn't understood at the time. My eyes drifted toward the far corner of the garage, where a large shape sat beneath a heavy canvas cover. I had noticed it before years ago, but Walter had always brushed it off. Just something I'm working on, he'd say. And I had never pushed. Now, standing there alone, I realized how much I had accepted without asking. I walked toward it slowly, my heartbeat picking up in a way that had nothing to do with the short distance. When I reached the edge of the cover, I hesitated again, not because I was afraid of what was underneath, because I had a strange feeling that once I looked, I wouldn't be able to go back to not knowing. Still, I reached out and pulled the canvas back just enough to see. Metal, curved lines, a shape that spoke of another era. It was a car. Not just any car, a classic partially restored its surface, dulled by time, but still unmistakably valuable to anyone who knew what they were looking at. I stared at it, my mind racing. Walter had never mentioned this. Not in detail. Not in a way that suggested it was anything more than a hobby, But this wasn't just a hobby. This was a project, a serious one. And suddenly, Derek's words echoed in my head. Some of those things might be worth something. I let the cover fall back into place, my hands slightly unsteady now. This wasn't just about memories. This was about value. Real value. I turned away from the car and began looking more carefully at the rest of the garage. The shelves that once seemed ordinary now felt deliberate. Every box, every label, every placement carried intention. Walter hadn't just stored things. He had organized them, protected them, prepared them. That thought led my eyes to the back wall, where a tall shelving unit stood filled with containers stacked neatly from floor to ceiling. Behind it, partially hidden, I noticed something I hadn't seen before: a narrow gap. I moved closer, my curiosity sharpening. The shelving unit wasn't flush against the wall. It had been positioned slightly forward just enough to conceal what lay behind it. I reached for the side of the unit and pushed. It shifted. Not easily, but not as if it had been permanently fixed either. My pulse quickened. Walter had hidden something. Carefully, I moved the shelving unit aside just enough to reveal what it had been concealing. A steel cabinet, tall, old, and locked. I stood there staring at it, a strange mix of emotions rising in my chest. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't something forgotten. This was something placed out of sight on purpose. I stepped closer, my hand hovering over the handle. For a moment, I considered walking away, closing the door, pretending I hadn't seen any of this, going back to the version of my life where the garage was just a place of memories and nothing more. But that version of my life was already gone. Derek had made sure of that the moment he took my keys and called me helpless. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small ring of keys I still carried, house keys, old keys, keys I hadn't sorted through in years. Walter had always kept spare keys in predictable places. But this felt different. I tried one. It didn't fit. Another? Nothing. On the third attempt, the key slid into the lock with a quiet, unmistakable click. I froze. For a second, I just stood there, my hand still on the key, my breath held without realizing it. Then slowly, I turned it. The lock opened. A soft metallic sound echoed in the quiet garage, louder than it should have been. I pulled the cabinet door open. Inside, everything was arranged with the same precision I had seen throughout the rest of the garage. Binders, folders, envelopes, a small lockbox. It wasn't clutter. It was a system. I reached for one of the binders and opened it. Documents, receipts, photographs. Some of them showed the car in different stages of restoration. Others appeared to be records, ownership, history parts, purchases, correspondence. Even without fully understanding what I was looking at, I could tell it was important, valuable in a way that went beyond sentiment. My heart began to beat faster, a quiet realization forming at the edges of my mind. This is what Derek was after. Not just the car, everything tied to it. The proof, the paperwork, the ability to turn it into something more than just an object sitting in a garage. I closed the binder carefully and reached for the lockbox. It was smaller, heavier than it looked. I set it on the shelf and opened it. Inside there were a few items neatly arranged: a set of keys, a sealed envelope, and a folded piece of paper. My hand moved toward the envelope first. On the front in Walter's handwriting were a few simple words: "Lucille, only open if you need to understand Derek." My chest tightened. Not if you need help. Not if something goes wrong. If you need to understand Derek. I stared at the envelope, my fingers brushing lightly over the surface. Whatever was inside Walter hadn't meant for me to read it lightly. He had meant for me to read it when something had already begun, and something had. I swallowed slowly, my throat suddenly dry. Then I looked around the garage one more time, at the workbench, at the covered car, at the shelves, the order, the care Walter had poured into this place. He hadn't left this behind by accident. He had left it for me, and maybe to protect me. I picked up the envelope, holding it a little tighter than necessary. For years I had avoided this space because it held too much of the past. Now I understood it held something else entirely. The truth. About my husband, about my son, and about what was about to happen next. I didn't open the letter right away. Instead, I stood there in the garage, the envelope resting in my hands, feeling its weight as if it carried more than paper inside. For a long moment, I simply listened to the quiet hum of the world outside, to the faint creak of the structure settling to my own breathing, which had grown shallow without me noticing. Walter had never been a man of unnecessary words. If he wrote something down, especially something like this, it mattered. And the way he had addressed it. Only open if you need to understand Derek. Not if you miss me. Not if you're lonely. Not even if you need help. If you need to understand your own son. That wasn't a casual message. That was a warning. I carried the envelope back into the house with me, closing the garage door carefully behind me as if I were sealing something back into place. I didn't want Derek or anyone to know I had been in there. Not yet. Not. Inside, I sat at the kitchen table, the same place where Derek had stood just days earlier and called me helpless. The same place where I had started to doubt myself. Now the envelope sat between my hands like a quiet challenge. I ran my fingers along the edge of it, then finally broke the seal. The paper inside was folded neatly, Walter's handwriting as steady as I remembered. I unfolded it slowly and began to read. Lucy, if you're reading this, then something has already started. I'm sorry for that. I wanted to believe I was wrong about him. I truly did. But a man doesn't prepare for something like this unless he sees it clearly enough to be afraid of it. My chest tightened. Walter had never spoken about Derek like that, not directly, not to me. Derek has always been good at appearing like he's doing the right thing. That's his strength and his weakness. He knows what people expect to see, and he knows how to give it to them. But there's a difference between helping someone and positioning yourself to take control of them, and I've watched him cross that line more than once. My eyes blurred for a moment, and I had to blink to keep reading. You didn't see it the way I did Lucy. That's not your fault. You see the best in people. That's one of the things I've always loved about you, but sometimes seeing the best means missing the truth. I swallowed hard, my hands trembling slightly now. Years ago, Derek came to me about money. More than once. He always had a reason. A plan. A promise that it would be the last time. At first I helped him. Quietly. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to worry. But then I started noticing the pattern. The urgency. The pressure. The way he would shift from asking to expecting if I didn't respond quickly enough. That's when I realized something I didn't want to admit. He wasn't just asking for help. He was testing how far he could go. I felt a sharp pain in my chest, like something inside me was being pulled too tight. This wasn't the son I knew. Or maybe it was, and I had chosen not to see it. The car in the garage. I paused, my breath catching. It's more than it looks like. You know I never cared much about showing off what I was working on, but that project, if it's finished properly, and if the documentation stays intact, it could be worth a great deal. Derek figured that out before I wanted him to. There it was. The connection, the garage, the car, the value. Everything Derek had been circling around without saying directly. He pushed me to sell it early, said we could use the money, said it didn't make sense to let it sit there. But it wasn't ready, and more importantly, it wasn't his to decide. When I refused, I saw something in him I couldn't ignore anymore. Not anger, not disappointment, entitlement. The word sat heavy on the page. Entitlement. Not need, not desperation. A belief that something belonged to him whether it did or not. So I made a decision. I structured everything in a way that protects you first. The car, the documentation, the access, none of it can be used without your direct willing involvement. And there's more in the files that explains exactly how that protection works. I thought back to the binders, the lockbox, the careful organization. Walter hadn't just stored things. He had built a system, a shield. But Lucy, if Derek ever tries to rush you, pressure you, isolate you, or make you doubt your own ability to decide, that won't be because he's worried about you. It will be because he needs something from you. My throat tightened. Every word felt like it had been written about the past few weeks. The questions, the suggestions, the way Derek had taken my keys. And if that happens, you need to remember something very clearly. You are not helpless. The tears came. Then quiet, unexpected, but impossible to hold back. I pressed my lips together, trying to steady myself as I continued reading. You've managed this home, this life, and this family with more strength than you give yourself credit for. Don't let anyone, especially our own son, convince you otherwise. I wish I could have handled this differently while I was still here. Maybe I should have been more direct. Maybe I should have told you everything. But I hoped he would change. I hoped I was wrong. If I wasn't, then I'm trusting you to see clearly now, and to protect yourself the way I would have if I could. Walter. I sat there for a long time after I finished reading. The letter lay open on the table, the ink still as steady as the man who had written it. For years I had believed that Walter kept things from me out of habit, that he simply preferred to carry certain burdens on his own. Now I understood something different. He hadn't kept this from me to exclude me. He had kept it from me to protect me from something I wasn't ready to see, from something I didn't want to see. My own son. I wiped my eyes and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling as if it might offer some kind of clarity. Everything Derek had done over the past few months replayed in my mind, but now it looked different. Not random. Not exaggerated concern. Deliberate. The questions about my memory, the comments about my energy, the way he had started speaking for me instead of to me, and then finally the moment in the kitchen, taking my keys, calling me helpless. That hadn't been frustration. It had been strategy, a way to take something from me piece by piece until I was small enough, dependent enough, uncertain enough to give him what he wanted without resistance. Access. That word came back again. But now I understood what it meant. Not access to the garage. Access to me. To my decisions. To my authority over what Walter had left behind. I looked down at the letter again, my fingers resting lightly on the edge of the page. You saw it? I whispered softly. You saw it before I did. And he had trusted me to see it too eventually. The grief that followed wasn't just for Walter. It was for Derek. For the version of him I had held on to long after it stopped being true. For the space between who he had been and who he had chosen to become. But beneath that grief, something else began to take shape. Not fear. Not confusion. Clarity. Cold, steady, undeniable clarity. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back into the envelope. Then I stood up. I walked to the window and looked out toward the garage, the late afternoon light casting long shadows across the yard. For years I had avoided that place because it held too much of the past. Now I understood it held something else. The truth Walter had left for me, and the choice he knew I would have to make. Behind me, the house was quiet. In front of me, the garage stood exactly as it always had. But nothing about my life felt the same anymore, because now I wasn't wondering what my son wanted. I knew. And more importantly, I knew what I had to do next. The next time Derek came over, I was ready. Not in the way he might have expected. I didn't confront him. I didn't wave Walter's letter in his face or accuse him of anything outright. That would have been too easy and far too dangerous. Instead, I did something much quieter. I let him believe I was exactly who he thought I was becoming. Slower. Softer. A little uncertain. Helpless. It wasn't easy to play that role. Every instinct in me resisted it. I had spent a lifetime being capable, steady someone others leaned on. To suddenly step into the shape Derek had been carving for me, it felt like shrinking inside my own skin. But Walter's words stayed with me. He knows how to give people what they expect to see. So I gave Derek what he expected. And I watched. He arrived mid-morning with Heather, both of them carrying that same careful energy they had perfected over the past few months, concern wrapped in politeness, decisions disguised as suggestions. Mom, Derek said as he stepped into the kitchen, his voice smooth, almost rehearsed. "How are you feeling today?" I hesitated just long enough to make it believable. "A little tired," I said. "Didn't sleep much." Heather's expression softened immediately. "Oh, Lucille, you should have called us." I gave a small apologetic smile. I didn't want to bother anyone. That was the first piece. Making myself smaller. Derek nodded, stepping closer, his eyes scanning me the way someone might examine a situation rather than a person. "Well, that's exactly why we're here," he said. "You don't have to handle things alone anymore." There it was again. Alone. As if independence were a flaw. We sat at the table, the same one where I had read Walter's letter just days before. The memory of it grounded me even as I lowered my gaze slightly, playing the part Derek needed to see. "I've been thinking," he continued, folding his hands in front of him. "Maybe it's time we make a few adjustments. Just to make things easier for you." "Easier." I nodded slowly. "What kind of adjustments?" Heather leaned forward, her tone gentle but precise. "Nothing major. Just organizing things. Helping with your accounts maybe. Making sure everything is running smoothly. Running smoothly. As if my life were a system that needed managing." Derek picked up the thread immediately. "Yeah. I mean, there's no reason for you to be dealing with all that stress on your own. Bills, paperwork, appointments. It's a lot. It hasn't been a problem so far," I said softly. He gave a small, reassuring smile. "And we want to keep it that way." That was the second piece. Framing control as prevention. Heather reached out, placing her hand lightly on mine. "We're just trying to help Lucille. You've done everything for so long. It's okay to let someone else take over a little. Take over, not assist, not support. Take over." I let my hand remain under hers, not pulling away, even though every part of me wanted to, maybe I said after a moment. "I suppose I have been feeling a little overwhelmed lately. That wasn't entirely a lie. Just not for the reasons they thought." Derek's posture shifted subtly, something tightening behind his calm expression. "Not concern. Opportunity." "Exactly," he said. "That's what we've been saying." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder, placing it carefully on the table. "Paperwork. Of course. We've already looked into a few options," he continued. "Nothing complicated. Just a way to make sure everything is handled properly going forward." I glanced at the folder but didn't open it. "What kind of options?" "Just some basic arrangements," he said smoothly. "Power of attorney, maybe. Something temporary. Just until you're feeling more like yourself again. Temporary." Another word designed to sound harmless. But I knew better. I let my fingers rest lightly on the edge of the folder as if I were considering it. "I'm not sure I understand all of this," I said quietly. That was the third piece, inviting him to explain. Derek leaned in slightly, his voice lowering as if he were speaking to someone fragile. "It just means I'd be able to handle things for you if needed. Pay bills, manage accounts, make sure nothing falls through the cracks." Falls through the cracks. Like I was already dropping things. Heather nodded beside him. "It's really just for your protection." Protection. Another word that sounded like care and felt like a cage. I took a slow breath, then looked up at Derek. Would I still be able to make my own decisions, I asked. The question hung in the air longer than it should have. Derek smiled again, but this time it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Of course," he said. "This is just a safety net. A safety net he controlled." I nodded slowly, then let my gaze drift away, as if I were processing more than I could fully grasp. "Maybe I need a little time to think about it," I said. There was the slightest flicker of impatience on his face. "Just for a second." Then it was gone. "Take all the time you need," he replied. "We're not rushing you," but everything about his tone said otherwise. That was when I decided to test him. I kept my voice light, almost absent-minded. "I went into the garage yesterday," I said. The reaction was immediate, not explosive, but sharp. What Derek's head snapped toward me before he could stop himself. Heather stiffened beside him. "I just..." "Open the door?" I added, watching carefully, looked around a little. Derek leaned forward, his calm slipping just enough to reveal something underneath. Why, he asked. Too quickly. Too directly. I blinked as if confused by the question. "I don't know. I was thinking about your father. What did you touch?" he pressed. There it was. Not how did it feel. Not was it hard. What did you touch? "Nothing much," I said slowly. "Some old boxes. The workbench." "Did you open anything?" He asked, his voice tightening. Heather placed a hand on his arm, a silent warning, but he didn't pull back. "Derek," she murmured. He ignored her. "Mom, did you go through any of Dad's files?" "Files. Not belongings." "Files." I shook my head gently. "No, I didn't even know where to look. That wasn't true." But it was what he needed to hear. Derek exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "Okay," he said, leaning back again. That's good. Good. As if I had passed some kind of test." Heather forced a small smile. "It can be overwhelming in there. Maybe we should all go through it together sometime. Together. Under their control." I lowered my eyes again, nodding faintly. Maybe. But inside, everything had shifted. Because in that brief moment, Derek had shown me something he hadn't meant to reveal. Fear. Not for me. For what I might find. For what I might already know. And that told me everything I needed to understand. This wasn't about helping me manage my life. This was about controlling access to something he believed he couldn't reach without me. After a few more minutes of gentle pressure and careful persuasion, Derek and Heather gathered their things and left, promising to check in soon and go over the paperwork together. I walked them to the door, thanked them, smiled the way they expected me to. And then I locked it behind them. For a long time I stood there in the quiet of the house, my hand resting on the doorknob, my mind replaying every word, every glance, every shift in tone. Walter had been right. Derek didn't come at me directly. He positioned himself. He built a narrative. He waited for the moment when I would start to believe it too. But that moment had passed. Because now I wasn't reacting anymore. I was watching, and I was learning. I turned and looked out toward the garage again, the structure standing still in the fading afternoon light. Whatever Derek thought was hidden there, he was more afraid of me finding it than I had ever been of going inside. And that meant one thing. I wasn't as powerless as he needed me to be. Not even close. That night I didn't sleep much. Not because I was afraid, because my mind finally had something solid to hold on to. For weeks, maybe months, I had been reacting, trying to make sense of Derek's tone, Heather's words, the subtle shifts in how I was being treated, questioning myself, adjusting, doubting. Now, for the first time, I wasn't guessing anymore. I knew. Walter hadn't just left me a warning. He had left me a map, and maps are meant to be followed. The next morning, I made a call I should have made sooner. Her name was Sharon Bell. We had met years ago through church. Two women who found themselves sitting next to each other often enough that conversation became routine and routine became friendship. Sharon was a widow too, though she carried her loss differently. Where I leaned into memory, she leaned into structure. She had spent most of her career working as a probate paralegal. Not a lawyer, but someone who understood how things moved behind the scenes, what mattered, what didn't, and what people often tried to hide. More importantly, Sharon wasn't easily fooled. When she answered the phone, her voice was steady, warm, and alert all at once. Lucille. It's been a while. You all right? I hesitated just for a moment. Old habits die slowly. I'm not sure I admitted. There was a pause on the line, not awkward, but attentive. Do you want to tell me what's going on? I did. Not all at once. Not perfectly. But enough. I told her about Derek taking my keys, about the conversations that had started to feel less like concern and more like control, about the paperwork he had brought over, the way he had reacted when I mentioned the garage. And then finally, I told her about Walter's letter. By the time I finished, my voice had steadied. Saying it out loud didn't make it heavier. It made it clearer. Sharon didn't interrupt while I spoke. She didn't rush to conclusions or offer easy reassurance. She simply listened. When I finished, she exhaled slowly. All right, she said. We're not guessing anymore. That word we felt different coming from her. Not like a strategy, like support. I need you to bring everything you found, she continued. The letter, the documents from the garage, anything you think might be connected. You think it's that serious? I asked. I think it's already serious, she replied calmly. We just need to understand how serious. An hour later, Sharon was sitting at my kitchen table, the same place Derek had tried to convince me to hand over control of my life. The difference now was who was asking the questions. She worked methodically, her reading glasses perched low on her nose, flipping through the documents I had taken from the steel cabinet. She didn't react dramatically. She didn't need to. The more she read, the quieter she became. That was what worried me. Well, I asked after a while. Sharon didn't look up right away. She finished the page she was on, placed it neatly aside, and then met my eyes. This is organized, she said. I frowned slightly. Organized? Very, she replied. Your husband knew exactly what he was doing. There was something reassuring in that. Walter had always been careful, thoughtful, But hearing it confirmed he had anticipated something like this made everything feel more real. Sharon tapped lightly on one of the binders. "This isn't just a hobby project," she said. "This is documentation. Ownership records, restoration history, correspondence with specialists." "Lucille, this is a full paper trail." "For the car," I said. "Yes," she nodded. "And that matters more than the car itself." I leaned forward slightly. "How?" She folded her hands together. "Because with something like a classic car, especially one that's been restored or is in the process of being restored, the documentation is what proves its value. Without it, it's just an old vehicle. With it, it becomes an asset." An asset. The word settled heavily between us. Walter mentioned that in the letter, I said quietly, that Derek had figured out it could be worth something. Sharon nodded. He wasn't wrong. My stomach tightened. "How much?" She gave a small, careful shrug. Hard to say without a full evaluation, but based on what I'm seeing here, enough to matter. Enough to matter. Enough to make a man pressure his own mother. I sat back in my chair trying to steady the thoughts racing through my mind. "And Derek would need—" I hesitated. What exactly access Sharon said simply? That word again, but not just physical access, she continued. "He needs legal access. Control. The ability to make decisions about the asset, sell it, transfer it, leverage it. And he can't do that without me." Sharon held my gaze. "Not if your husband set this up properly." I thought about the structure Walter had described in the letter. The conditions. The protections. "He did," I said. "He made it clear. Nothing moves without me." Sharon nodded slowly. "Then that's your leverage." Leverage? I had never thought of myself that way. I had spent weeks feeling like something was being taken from me, my independence, my authority, my place in my own life. Now, for the first time, I saw it differently. There was something Derek needed, and I was the only way to get it. Sharon turned another page, then paused. "Lucille," she said carefully, "I need to ask you something." "All right." "Has Derek mentioned anything about your health to other people?" I felt a chill run through me. "Yes," I admitted. "He's been framing things. Small things. Making them sound bigger." She nodded as if that confirmed something. "That's not just family concern," she said. "That's groundwork." "For what?" "For control," she replied. "If he can establish that you're not fully capable of managing your own affairs, he can try to step in legally." The room felt smaller suddenly. "Like power of attorney?" I asked. "Possibly," she said. "Or even something stronger depending on how far he's willing to go." I thought about the folder Derek had placed on the table, the way he had framed it as temporary, protective. My hands tightened slightly in my lap. "He already brought paperwork," I said. "He wanted me to sign something." Sharon's expression didn't change, but her voice sharpened just enough to cut through the air. "And you didn't know!" "Good," she said firmly. "Don't sign anything, not without someone on your side reviewing it first. Someone on your side." I hadn't realized how alone I had been feeling until that moment. Sharon closed the binder gently and leaned back. "Here's what I think," she said. "Derek is under pressure. Financial pressure, most likely. He sees this asset as a solution." "That much is clear," I said. "He also knows he can't get to it directly," she continued. "So he's doing the next best thing, positioning himself to control the person who can. Me." I let that settle. "And if I don't give him that control," I asked. Sharon met my eyes again, her expression steady. "Then he'll escalate." The word hung in the air, heavy and unavoidable. "How far?" I asked quietly. "That depends on him," she said. But based on what you've told me and what I've seen here, he's already started down that path. I thought about Derek's reaction when I mentioned the garage, the way his calm had cracked just for a moment. Fear. He wasn't just planning. He was running out of time. What do I do? I asked. It wasn't a question I asked lightly. Sharon didn't answer right away. She considered it, weighing her words. First, she said, "You don't let him know what you know." I nodded slowly. Second, you secure everything, she continued. Copies of these documents, originals somewhere safe, not just in the garage. I can do that. Third, she added, you stay exactly how he expects you to be. I frowned slightly. You mean, let him underestimate you, she said. It's the safest position you can be in right now. That part at least I had already started, and after that I asked. Sharon's expression softened just a little. After that, she said we make sure you're protected legally, financially, and personally. Protected. The word felt different now. Not something being done to me, something being built around me. I looked down at Walter's letter still resting on the table between us. He had seen this coming. He had prepared for it. But he hadn't been here to stop it. That part was up to me. I took a slow breath and lifted my head. All right, I said quietly. Sharon nodded once. All right, she echoed. Outside, the late afternoon light stretched across the yard, reaching toward the garage in long, quiet lines. It didn't feel like a place I needed to avoid anymore. It felt like the center of something. Something Derek wanted. Something Walter had protected. And something I was finally beginning to understand. Once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. It changes the way you hear every word, the way you notice every pause, the way you understand the silences between what is said and what is meant. After Sharon left that afternoon, the house felt different, not emptier, but clearer. Like someone had wiped a layer of fog from the windows, and everything outside had come into focus all at once. Derek wasn't just hovering, he was circling. And whatever he needed it soon. I didn't have to wait long to understand how soon. 2 days later, he came by again, this time alone. That in itself was unusual. Derek rarely separated himself from Heather when it came to anything involving me. They worked like a pair, one soft, one firm, one reassuring, one decisive. Seeing him without her made something in my chest tighten. Mom, he said as he stepped inside, his tone brisker than usual. You got a minute? I nodded, keeping my expression open, unguarded. Of course. He didn't sit right away. Instead, he walked around the living room, glancing at things without really seeing them. His movements were sharper, less controlled than before. Something had changed. What's going on? I asked gently. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Just a lot okay. Work's been crazy. Work? That was new. Derek didn't usually talk about work unless it served a purpose. What kind of crazy? I asked, keeping my tone light. He gave a short, humorless laugh. The kind where you start wondering if it's worth it. I watched him carefully. Your shop? I asked. He nodded, pacing once before finally dropping into the chair across from me. Yeah. Expansion didn't go the way I planned, he admitted. Costs went up, parts got delayed, clients backed out. Each sentence came faster than the last, like something he had been holding in for too long. I had to take on more than I expected, he continued. Loans? Short-term stuff. I thought I could cover it, but... He trailed off, shaking his head. But he couldn't. I let a moment pass before speaking. That sounds stressful, I said. It wasn't sympathy I was offering, it was space. He filled it immediately. It's not just stressful, Mom. It's a mess. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I've got suppliers calling asking about payments. The bank's tightening things. I just need a little breathing room to get everything back on track. Breathing room. The way he said it made it sound temporary, manageable. But the tension in his voice told a different story. How much room, I asked quietly. He hesitated. Not because he didn't know, because he didn't want to say it. Enough, he said finally. I just need to bridge the gap. Once things stabilize, it'll all even out. I nodded slowly as if considering his words. And you think the garage can help with that, I said. The shift in him was immediate. He froze just for a fraction of a second. Then he leaned back, forcing a casual tone that didn't quite land. I think it's part of the solution, he said. Dad had things in there that could be worth something. You know that. I held his gaze. I know he worked hard on what was in there. That's exactly my point, Derek said, a flicker of frustration breaking through. Why let it sit there when it could actually do something? Help. Solve a problem. Solve his problem. I tilted my head slightly, letting confusion soften my expression. I didn't realize it was that serious, I said. He laughed again, but there was no humor in it. It's serious enough, he muttered. More than I'd like. For a moment, something almost like honesty flickered across his face. Then it was gone. Replaced by calculation. That's why I've been trying to get you to look at things differently, he continued. This isn't just about you holding on to the past, Mom. It's about making smart decisions for the future. Smart decisions. His future. I folded my hands in my lap, keeping my posture small, receptive. What kind of decisions, I asked. He leaned forward again, his voice lowering slightly. Letting me handle it, he said. There it was. Not a suggestion, a direction. I could take care of everything, he continued. Evaluate what's there. Get it appraised properly. Figure out the best way to use it. Use it. He didn't say sell. He didn't say liquidate. He said use. I wouldn't have to worry about it. I asked softly. Exactly. He said, relief flashing across his face as if I were finally understanding. You wouldn't have to deal with any of it. I'd handle it all. And in doing so, he would control everything. I let a pause stretch between us long enough to feel intentional, but not confrontational. Derek, I said slowly, your father never let anyone else handle his projects. His jaw tightened. That's because he didn't have to, he replied. Things are different now. Different. That word again. Everything was different when it suited him. He trusted me, I said. And I'm asking you to trust me, Derek shot back faster than he intended. There it was again, not a request, a demand wrapped in emotion. I looked at him carefully, seeing not just my son, but the man Sharon had described. Pressured, cornered, and willing to push further. I do trust you, I said gently. The lie sat easily on my tongue. But this feels sudden. His frustration flared again. It's not sudden, he insisted. We've been talking about this for months. No. You have been circling it for months. There's a difference. I just need a little time, I said. Time. The one thing he didn't have. He stood abruptly, pacing again. That's the problem, Mom. Time isn't something I have right now. There it was. The truth stripped down to its core. He stopped in front of me, his expression tightening. I'm trying to fix something before it gets worse, he said, "and you're sitting on something that could help, that could make a real difference. Something. Not your father's work, not your family's history. Something." "I'm not sitting on anything," I said quietly. His eyes flashed. "You're sitting on access," he corrected. The word hit the air like a crack. Access. Not ownership. Not responsibility. Access. To me. To my decision. To my control. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us, heavy with everything that had finally been said out loud. Then Derek exhaled sharply, running a hand over his face. "Look," he said, his tone shifting again, softer but no less urgent. "I don't want to fight about this. I need you to understand where I'm coming from." I understood perfectly, more than he realized. "I'm trying," I said. He nodded as if that were enough for now. "Good," he replied, "because we need to figure this out. Soon. Soon. A deadline without a date." He grabbed his keys from the counter, pausing at the door. "And Mom," he added, glancing back at me. "Yes, if you're going to go into the garage again, just wait until I'm there. Okay, it's safer that way." "Safer? For who?" I nodded, lowering my gaze slightly. "All right." He left a moment later, the door closing behind him with a soft click. I stayed where I was, listening to the sound of his car pulling away, the quiet settling back into the house. Then I lifted my head. The softness left my expression. The uncertainty, the hesitation, all of it faded, because now I knew exactly what we were dealing with. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't concern taken too far. This was pressure. Deliberate. Focused. And escalating. Derek wasn't just asking anymore. He was running out of time. And when people run out of time, they don't slow down. They push harder. I stood up and walked to the window, my eyes drifting once more toward the garage. The late afternoon sun caught the edge of the roof, casting long shadows across the yard. Inside that building was everything Derek thought could save him. And everything Walter had put in place to stop him from taking it the wrong way. I crossed my arms lightly, thinking through everything Sharon had said. He'll escalate. She had been right. He already was, which meant the next move wouldn't be subtle. It wouldn't be careful. It would be decisive. And I needed to be ready for it, because whatever Derek planned to do next, it wouldn't just test my patience. It would test whether I was willing to stand between my son and what he believed he was entitled to take. Derek didn't give me much time. 3 days after that conversation, he called and said he wanted to sit down properly and go over a few things just to make sure everything was clear moving forward. His tone was careful again, measured, almost gentle. But underneath it, I could hear something else. Urgency. "We'll keep it simple," he said. "Just a quick meeting. I've asked someone to join us who can help explain things better." Someone? I didn't ask who. I already had a feeling. "All right," I said. "What time?" "That afternoon." "Of course." No time to think. No time to prepare. Or at least that was what he intended. After I hung up, I stood in the kitchen for a moment, letting the silence settle around me. Then I reached for my phone again and called Sharon. "He's moving," I said as soon as she answered. "I figured he would," she replied calmly. "What's the setup, a meeting?" "This afternoon. He's bringing someone." There was a brief pause. "Then you're not going into that alone," Sharon said. "I didn't think I should." "You're right. You shouldn't." Within an hour, Sharon was at my house again, sitting at the same table, her presence steady and grounding. "We don't stop him from talking," she said. We let him show us exactly what he's trying to do. And then I asked. And then we listen carefully, she replied, because people under pressure make mistakes. I nodded slowly. What do I do? She met my eyes. Met? You stay calm. You don't agree to anything. You don't sign anything. And most importantly, she paused slightly, her tone sharpening. You don't let them rush you. Rush. Walter's word. I reached into my pocket and touched the small recording device Sharon had given me earlier that morning. It was simple, discreet, barely noticeable. Just in case she had said. Just in case. At exactly 2 o'clock, Derek's car pulled into the driveway. He didn't come alone. Heather stepped out first, her posture composed, but her face tighter than usual. Behind her was a man I didn't recognize, mid-50s well-dressed, carrying a leather briefcase, and a woman younger with a clipboard tucked under her arm and a practiced, neutral expression. A team. Of course. I opened the door before they could knock. Hi, Mom, Derek said, stepping forward with that familiar half-smile. Come in, I replied. We gathered in the living room this time, not the kitchen. Derek chose the seats deliberately, placing himself across from me, Heather beside him, the man and the woman slightly angled like observers rather than participants. Sharon sat quietly to my right, her presence unannounced but unmistakable. Derek noticed her immediately. Oh, he said, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. I didn't realize you had someone here. I thought it might be helpful, I said evenly. He hesitated, then nodded. Of course, he replied. That's fine. But it wasn't fine. I could see it in the way his shoulders tightened in the brief glance he exchanged with the man beside him. Still, he pressed on. Mom, this is Carlton Reeves, he said, gesturing toward the man. He's an attorney. He's just here to help explain a few things. Carlton gave a polite nod. Mrs. Simmons, it's a pleasure. And this is Denise Porter, Derek added, indicating the woman with the clipboard. She's worked with families in situations like this. Situations like this? I smiled faintly. What kind of situation is that? Denise returned the smile, practiced and calm. Transition periods, she said, when a loved one might need additional support. Support. Another word. Always another word. We settled into our seats, and for a moment the room was quiet. Then Carlton opened his briefcase and began. Mrs. Simmons, he said, his voice smooth and measured, your son has expressed some concerns about your well-being. Nothing alarming, of course, just the natural changes that come with time. Natural changes. I folded my hands in my lap. I see, I said. Derek leaned forward slightly, his tone soft but firm. We just want to make sure you're protected, Mom. That's all this is. Protected. Carlton nodded. Exactly. What we're discussing today is a proactive approach. Something that ensures your affairs are managed efficiently without unnecessary stress on your part. Managed. Without stress. Without me. Denise spoke next, her tone gentle, almost soothing. Sometimes when individuals experience minor lapses, nothing serious, just small things, it can be helpful to have a support system in place. Minor lapses. There it was. The narrative. I let a small frown crease my forehead as if I were trying to follow along. I'm not sure I understand, I said quietly. Derek reached for the folder on the table, sliding it toward me. This is just paperwork, he said. It gives me the ability to step in where needed. Nothing changes unless it has to. Unless it has to. I looked down at the folder but didn't open it. What kind of things would you be stepping in for? I asked. Bills, accounts, property decisions, he said, just making sure everything stays on track. Property. My eyes lifted to meet his. Like the garage, I asked softly. The room shifted. It was subtle, but it was there. Carlton paused. Denise glanced at Derek. Heather's fingers tightened slightly around her clipboard. And Derek? Derek didn't answer right away. Finally, he exhaled. That's part of it, he admitted. Part of it. I tilted my head slightly. And why does that need to happen now? There it was. The question he didn't want to answer. Carlton stepped in smoothly. Timing is simply a matter of practicality, he said. When assets remain unutilized, it can create complications down the line. That's not what I asked, I said gently. My voice wasn't raised, but it was steady. Carlton paused. Derek leaned forward again, his calm starting to fray. Because it matters now, he said. Because it can help now. Help who? I held his gaze. How, I asked. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Derek said it. It could solve a problem, he said, his voice tightening. A real problem. There it was. Not vague. Not wrapped in concern. A problem. His problem. Denise shifted slightly as if trying to redirect the conversation. Mrs. Simmons, we're just trying to create a framework that allows your son to support you more effectively. Support me, I interrupted softly. My eyes moved from her to Derek. Or access something he needs. The silence that followed was different. Heavier. Sharper. Derek's jaw tightened. That's not fair, he said. Isn't it? I asked. Heather finally spoke, her voice quieter than before. Lucille, this isn't about taking anything from you. No, it wasn't. It was about taking control. I leaned back slightly, my hands still folded, my posture calm. Then why, I asked, my voice steady, does it feel like everything we're discussing involves me giving something up? No one answered. Not immediately. And in that silence, something shifted. Because for the first time since this had started, I wasn't the one being explained. I wasn't the one being evaluated. I wasn't the one being positioned. They were. And they knew it. I let the moment stretch just long enough to make it clear that I wasn't going to rush to fill it. Not anymore. Because whatever they had planned for this meeting, it wasn't unfolding the way they expected. And that was exactly where I needed to be. The silence after my question didn't break cleanly. It fractured. Carlton Reeves shifted in his seat first, adjusting his cuff as if the movement itself could restore order. Denise Porter glanced down at her clipboard, flipping a page she didn't need to read. Heather kept her eyes lowered, her fingers tightening just enough for me to notice. And Derek held my gaze like he was trying to decide which version of himself would answer. The patient son, or the man who was running out of time? Mom, he said finally. His voice measured again, but thinner than before. No one's asking you to give anything up. We're just trying to make sure everything is handled properly. Properly. I let the words sit between us. And who decides what properly means, I asked. Carlton leaned forward, stepping back into his role. That's exactly why we're here, he said smoothly. To create clarity. To ensure that decisions are made in a structured, legally sound way. With Derek in control, Sharon said quietly beside me. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut cleanly through everything else. All eyes turned to her. Carlton paused, recalibrating. With your son acting in your best interest, he corrected. Sharon gave a small nod as if acknowledging the phrasing but not accepting it. And how she asked, "Do you determine what her best interest is?" The question wasn't hostile. It was precise. Carlton opened his mouth, then closed it again for a fraction of a second, long enough to reveal that he hadn't expected resistance framed this way. That would be based on observable factors, he said carefully, patterns of behavior, capacity for decision-making, overall well-being. Examples Sharon pressed. Denise spoke this time, stepping in with that same practiced calm. Small things, she said. Forgetting items, missing calls, difficulty managing day-to-day responsibilities. I almost smiled, because I knew exactly what was coming next. Derek leaned forward, seizing the moment. Like when Mom lost her glasses at the store, he said. Or when she didn't answer her phone the other day. Or the mail piling up. I lifted a hand slightly, not sharply, just enough. "That's enough," I said. My voice didn't rise. But it didn't waver either. Derek stopped. For the first time since this began, he actually stopped. I misplaced my glasses once I continued. I returned a phone call after finishing what I was doing, and I hadn't opened the mail yet that morning. I let each point land on its own. Are those the concerns we're building this conversation on? Carlton shifted again, sensing the ground moving beneath him. These are indicators, he said, not conclusions, indicators of what I asked. No one answered immediately, because the truth didn't sound reasonable when spoken out loud. I leaned back slightly, folding my hands again, the calm returning fully. Now not the practiced softness I had shown Derek before, but something steadier, something anchored. "Let's be clear," I said. "You're suggesting I may not be capable of managing my own life, based on a handful of everyday moments that happen to anyone." Denise opened her mouth to respond, but I continued. "And because of that," I said, "you're recommending I give my son legal authority over my finances, my property, and my decisions." I turned my head slightly, meeting Carlton's eyes. "That's what this is, isn't it?" There was no way to soften it now. Carlton exhaled slowly. "It's a protective measure. It's a transfer of control," Sharon said quietly. Again, not loud. "Just exact." Derek's composure cracked. "This isn't about control," he snapped. "This is about helping before things get worse." "Worse?" I tilted my head slightly. "What gets worse?" I asked. His jaw tightened. "You know what I mean," he said. "No," I replied evenly. "I don't. That's why I'm asking." For a moment, I thought he might deflect again. But pressure does something to people. It narrows their choices. And Derek was running out of room. "My situation," he said, finally the words coming out sharper than he intended. "Things are tight right now. And that garage..." He stopped. Too late. The room went still. Carlton's eyes flicked toward him. Heather closed her eyes briefly as if she knew exactly what had just happened. Denise froze with her pen midair. And Derek? Derek realized it. The line he had just crossed. That garage. I repeated softly. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair again, the controlled version of him slipping further. "It's not just sitting there," he said. "It's something that could actually fix things. Real things. Not just hypothetical concerns about paperwork and independence. Fix things." There it was again. His problem. His urgency. I leaned forward slightly, and what would fixing things look like, I asked. He didn't hesitate this time. Liquidity, he said. Leverage. Options. Not memories. Not legacy. Options. Sharon's voice came in quietly from beside me. And you can't access any of that without Lucille's direct authorization, can you? Derek didn't answer. Because he didn't have to. We all knew the answer. I sat back again, letting the weight of that truth settle over the room. That's why this meeting is happening, I said. Not a question. A statement. Derek's eyes met mine, something harder in them now. Yes, he said. No more pretense. No more soft framing. Just yes. Carlton cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the conversation. Let's not lose sight of the broader picture, he said. This is about ensuring that all assets are managed in a way that benefits the family as a whole. The family, I repeated. I looked at Derek. Or you. He didn't flinch this time. Me, he said. Heather inhaled sharply beside him. Denise looked down. Carlton went still, and in that moment everything changed. Because once the truth is spoken, you can't dress it back up again. The room felt different now, stripped of politeness, stripped of careful wording. What remained was simple. Derek needed something, and he needed me to give it to him. I understand your situation, I said quietly. And I did, more than he realized. I understood the pressure, the fear, the desperation that comes when things start collapsing faster than you can fix them. But understanding doesn't mean surrender. And I'm sorry you're going through that, I continued. That part was true too. But then I let the rest of it settle. The part he didn't want to hear. But that doesn't give you the right to take control of my life to solve it. The words hung in the air, steady and unyielding. Derek's expression hardened. I'm not taking anything he said. You already did, I replied. His brow furrowed. What are you talking about? My keys, I said. The room went quiet again. You took them, I continued. You called me helpless. You started telling people I wasn't capable of managing my own affairs. Each point landed like a stone. And now I said you're asking me to sign documents that would make that narrative legally binding. No one moved. No one spoke. Because there was nothing left to soften. Nothing left to hide. Carlton closed his briefcase slowly, the sound of the latch clicking into place louder than it should have been. I think he said carefully, it may be best to revisit this conversation at another time. Translation. This isn't going the way we planned. Denise nodded faintly, gathering her papers. Heather remained still, her eyes fixed on the floor. And Derek. Derek didn't stand. He didn't move. He just looked at me. For a long time. Like he was seeing me clearly for the first time in months. Not as someone to manage. Not as someone to convince. But as someone standing in his way. You don't understand what's at stake, he said finally. His voice was quieter now, but more dangerous. I held his gaze. I understand exactly what's at stake, I said. Not just for him, for me. For everything Walter had left behind. For the line between help and control, between family and exploitation. Derek stood then abruptly, his chair scraping lightly against the floor. Fine, he said. One word. Sharp. Final. Take your time, he added, his tone tightening. But don't take too long. There it was. The edge beneath the request. The pressure beneath the words. He turned and walked toward the door without waiting for a response. Heather hesitated for a moment, glancing at me, something conflicted flickering across her face, then followed him. Carlton and Denise left quietly behind them, their professionalism intact, even as the situation unraveled. And then they were gone. The door closed. The house fell silent. I sat there for a moment longer, the echoes of the conversation still settling around me. Then I reached into my pocket and pressed my thumb lightly against the small recording device Sharon had given me. Still running. Every word, every admission, captured. Sharon exhaled slowly beside me. "Well," she said. I looked at her. "Well," I echoed. Because now, this wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was proof. The house stayed quiet long after they left. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. The kind that settles after something has shifted for good. Sharon didn't rush to speak. She stood slowly, walked over to the window, and looked out toward the driveway where Derek's car had disappeared minutes earlier. "He's past the point of pretending," she said. I nodded. Yes. That word didn't carry fear anymore. It carried certainty. For weeks I had been trying to understand what Derek was doing. Now I wasn't trying anymore. I knew. And more importantly, he knew that I knew. "That changes things," Sharon added. "It does," I said quietly. Because once the illusion is gone, people don't go back to subtlety. They escalate. We didn't have to wait long to see how far. It happened the next day. I had gone out with Sharon in the morning, taking copies of the documents to a secure place she trusted somewhere outside the house, outside the garage, outside Derek's reach. Not because I thought he would act immediately, but because I knew he might. When I returned home that afternoon, something felt wrong before I even reached the front door. It wasn't obvious. There were no broken windows, no signs of forced entry, but the air felt disturbed, like a room that had been entered quietly but not respectfully. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me, my eyes scanning the living room. Everything looked the same. But I've lived in this house long enough to know when something has shifted, even if I couldn't yet see it. I moved slowly through the hallway, my footsteps measured, my breathing steady. The kitchen was untouched, the bedrooms the same. Nothing out of place, and yet something was. My gaze drifted instinctively toward the back of the house, toward the yard, toward the garage. My heart tightened. I walked outside without thinking, my steps faster, now no longer cautious. The garage door was closed, just as I had left it. But as I got closer, I saw it. A faint scuff near the lock. Not enough for anyone else to notice. Enough for me. My pulse quickened. I reached for the handle and opened the door. The smell hit me again, oilwood metal. Familiar, but the stillness was gone. I didn't need to search long. The shelving unit, it had moved. Not dramatically, not carelessly, but just enough. Enough that I could tell someone had shifted it and tried to put it back exactly where it had been. My chest tightened. He had been here. Derek. I walked forward slowly, my eyes moving over the space with a sharper focus now, the canvas covering the car. It wasn't resting the same way. One corner was slightly off, as if it had been lifted and dropped back into place too quickly. The workbench. A tool was angled differently than I remembered. Small things. Careful things. But wrong. I reached the steel cabinet, my hand hovering over the handle. For a moment, I didn't want to open it, because once I did, I would know. And knowing meant accepting just how far Derek had already gone. Still, I opened it. The door swung out with that same quiet metallic sound. Inside, the binders were still there, the folders, the lockbox, but one of the stacks had shifted. Not missing, not yet, but disturbed. He had searched, not found, and left. I exhaled slowly, my hand tightening on the edge of the cabinet. This wasn't about suspicion anymore. This wasn't about interpreting behavior. This was trespass, not just into the garage, into my life, into something Walter had deliberately protected. I closed the cabinet carefully and stepped back. For a long moment, I just stood there letting the weight of it settle. Then I turned and walked back toward the house. That evening, Derek came by. He didn't call first. He didn't knock right away. I heard the car, the door, the footsteps, then the knock. 3 sharp taps. I opened the door. He stood there, his expression composed but too composed, like someone holding something tightly under the surface. "Mom," he said. "Derek." We looked at each other for a moment, the space between us filled with everything that hadn't been said. Then he stepped inside. "I was in the area," he said casually. "Thought I'd check in. In the area." I nodded, closing the door behind him. "That's thoughtful." He glanced around the room, his eyes moving quickly, subtly. "Checking. Always checking." "You went out today?" he asked. "Yes." "With Sharon?" "Yes." He nodded slowly. "Good," he said. "It's good you're not isolating yourself." The irony almost made me laugh. "I wasn't aware that I was," I replied. He didn't respond to that. Instead, he walked further into the house, his movements purposeful but controlled. Then he stopped, turned, and faced me. "Have you been in the garage again?" he asked. There it was, direct. No softness. No pretense. I met his eyes. Why, I asked. His jaw tightened. "Just answer the question, Mom." There was no please this time. No careful phrasing. Just pressure. "I have," I said, calmly. "What did you do in there?" he pressed. I looked around. That's it. That's it." He held my gaze, searching. "For what?" A slip, a sign. "Proof." I gave him nothing. After a moment, he exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair again. "You shouldn't be going in there alone," he said. "It's not safe." Not safe. I tilted my head slightly. "It wasn't safety that worried you yesterday," I said. He froze. Just for a second. Then his expression hardened. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." The room went still. Because this time I wasn't soft. I wasn't uncertain. I wasn't playing along. "You were in the garage," I said. Not a question. A statement. His eyes flashed. "I wasn't." "Don't," I interrupted gently. Not loud, not angry, but final. "Don't insult me by pretending." The words hung between us, sharp, clean, unavoidable. For a moment I thought he might deny it again, but something in my tone must have told him it wouldn't work, because instead he changed tactics. "I was trying to help," he said. "Help." I almost smiled. "You moved things," I replied. "You searched through your father's work like it belonged to you." "It does belong to me," he snapped. There it was. Not hesitation, not uncertainty, entitlement. "I'm his son, and I'm his wife," I said quietly. That stopped him, not because he didn't understand, because he did. "Too well." "You don't even know what's in there," he said, his voice tightening. "You don't understand what you're sitting on." "I understand enough," I replied. "Do you?" he challenged. "Because from where I'm standing, you're letting something valuable rot while everything around it falls apart. Everything around it. His world. His problem. Not mine. I'm not letting anything rot," I said. "I'm protecting what your father left. From who he demanded." I met his eyes. "From you." The silence that followed was heavier than anything that had come before, because this time there was no misunderstanding left, no illusion to hide behind, just truth. Derek stared at me, something raw and angry and desperate rising to the surface all at once. "You think I'm the problem," he said. "I think you're under pressure," I replied. "And I think you're making choices you wouldn't have made before." "That's not an answer," he snapped. "It is," I said calmly. "Just not the one you want." He took a step closer, his voice lowering. "You don't get it," he said. "I don't have time for this. Time. Always time." I know I said, and I did, because I could see it now, in the way he moved, in the way he spoke, in the way he had crossed a line he couldn't uncross. Derek wasn't just asking anymore. He wasn't just pressuring. He was running out of options. And when people run out of options, they don't ask, they take. He stared at me for a long moment, his breathing uneven now, his control slipping. Then without another word, he turned and walked out. The door slammed behind him. I stood there in the quiet, my heart steady, my mind clear. Because now, there was no doubt left. Not about Derek, not about the garage, and not about what was coming next. After Derek slammed the door, the house didn't feel empty. It felt exposed. Not because I was afraid he would come back that night, but because I understood something new. He had crossed a line. And people who cross lines don't go back to asking politely. They look for other ways in. That thought stayed with me through the evening, through the quiet routine of making dinner for one, through the long stretch of hours where the house seemed to listen along with me. I checked the locks twice before going to bed. Not out of panic, out of clarity. The next afternoon, I was in the kitchen when the phone rang. I almost didn't answer. Not because I didn't want to, but because I had started measuring every interaction differently. Every call, every knock, every unexpected moment carried weight now. Still, I picked it up. "Hello?" There was a brief pause on the other end, then a voice softer than I expected. "Lucille, it's Heather." I didn't respond right away. Heather had always been careful with her words, controlled, polished. This didn't sound like that. "I was wondering if I could come by," she said. "Just for a few minutes." No Derek. That was the first thing I noticed. "Is everything all right?" I asked. Another pause. "No," she said quietly. "It's not." I glanced toward the front door, then back toward the yard, my thoughts moving quickly. "All right," I said. "Come over." She arrived 20 minutes later. Alone. That more than anything else told me how serious this was. Heather stepped inside without her usual composure. Her movements were tighter, less practiced. The careful smile she usually wore was gone, replaced by something closer to strain. "Thank you for seeing me," she said. Of course, I replied. "Sit down." We moved into the living room, the same space where Derek had tried to turn me into a problem to be managed. Heather sat on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped together so tightly her knuckles had turned pale. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she exhaled slowly as if forcing herself to begin. "I don't have a lot of time," she said. "Derek doesn't know I'm here." That didn't surprise me. "What's going on?" I asked. She looked up at me, and for the first time since I had known her, I saw something unfiltered in her expression. Fear. "Things are worse than he told you," she said. I didn't react outwardly. I didn't need to. "I assumed they were," I replied. Heather gave a small, humorless laugh. "You have no idea," she said. Then slowly the truth began to come out. Not in one clean explanation, but in pieces, Fragments of something that had been building long before I realized it. The expansion at the shop, she said. It wasn't just a risk. It was a gamble. I stayed silent, letting her continue. He took on more than he could handle, she said. More loans, short-term financing. He kept telling me it was temporary, that once things picked up it would all even out. It hadn't. He didn't tell me how bad it was until a few months ago, she admitted. By then, it was already out of control. How bad, I asked quietly. Heather hesitated. Bad enough that if he doesn't cover certain payments soon. She trailed off, shaking her head. We could lose everything. Everything. The word landed heavily. Not just the business, the house, the stability, the life they had built. And he thinks the garage can fix that, I said. Heather nodded slowly. Yes. There was no denial in her voice, no attempt to soften it. He's been talking about it for a while, she continued. Not directly at first. Just hints. Comments about your husband's projects, about things sitting unused. I thought back to all those conversations, the casual mentions, the careful suggestions. They weren't casual, I said. No, Heather replied. They weren't. She looked down at her hands, her voice tightening. He thinks that if he can get control of whatever's in there, it could buy him time. Maybe even get him out completely. Control, not help, not permission. Control. And how was he planning to do that, I asked. Heather's fingers tightened again. That's why I'm here, she said. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. I shouldn't be doing this, she added quietly. But I don't see another way. She unlocked the screen, scrolled for a moment, then turned it toward me. Read this. I took the phone, my eyes scanning the screen. Messages. Between her and Derek. Short at first. Then longer. More direct. My chest tightened as I read. We need to move faster. She's not going to just hand it over. Then we make it easier for her to have no choice. What does that mean? Take things step by step. Keys first, then accounts. Then we build the case. Derek, I'm not losing everything because she's being stubborn. I looked up slowly. Heather's eyes met mine. He's been planning it, she said. Not just reacting. Planning. I scrolled further. If she won't sign, we go another route. What route? Medical. Capacity. We show she can't manage things anymore. My hand tightened slightly around the phone. He said that, I asked. Heather nodded. Yes. The room felt colder. Not because I was surprised, but because now I had proof. Not just suspicion. Not just interpretation. Proof. He wanted to build a case, I said. Yes, to show I'm not capable. Yes, Heather's voice broke slightly on that last word. I didn't think he would actually go that far, she admitted. At first I thought he was just panicking, trying to find a way out. And now, she swallowed. Now I think he's already too far in to stop. There it was, the truth she had been avoiding. And you? I asked. Me, she repeated. Yes, I said. Where do you stand in all of this? She looked down again, her expression tightening. I went along with it at first, she said. Not all of it, but enough. I didn't push back the way I should have. That didn't surprise me. Heather had always been pragmatic. She followed stability, and Derek had promised it. But this, she continued, gesturing toward the phone. This isn't just about money anymore. It's about taking something from you. And I can't pretend that's okay. Her voice steadied slightly as she met my eyes again. And Ava, she added. My granddaughter. She doesn't know what's happening, Heather said. And I don't want her growing up thinking this is how you treat family. That more than anything else sounded real. Not strategy, not calculation, fear. Not for herself, for her daughter. I'm not here to ask you for anything, Heather said quietly. I thought you deserved to know. Deserved to know. The words settled between us. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I handed her phone back. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. Not because she had fixed anything, but because she had confirmed everything. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy, final, because now there was no room left for doubt, no room left for benefit of the doubt, just truth. Derek hadn't just been trying to help. He had been building a plan, step by step, to take control, to take access, to take what he believed he needed, no matter what it cost. Heather stood slowly, her movements careful again, but different this time. Not controlled, cautious. I should go, she said. Before he notices, I nodded. Take care of yourself, I said. She hesitated at the door, then looked back at me. I'm sorry, she said. Not for everything, but for enough. Then she left. The door closed behind her, and once again I stood alone in the house. But this time I wasn't uncertain. I wasn't guessing. I wasn't trying to piece together fragments of something unclear. I had everything I needed. The letter, the documents, the recording, the messages, and now the truth. Clear, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. I walked slowly to the window, my eyes settling on the garage once more. For weeks, Derek had been moving toward it, planning for it, building a path to it. But now I was the one holding every step of that path in my hands, and for the first time since this began, I wasn't reacting to what my son was doing. I was deciding what would happen next. The morning of the meeting felt unusually still. Not calm, not peaceful, just quiet in a way that made every small sound stand out, the ticking of the kitchen clock, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the distant noise of a passing car. I stood at the sink with a cup of coffee I hadn't touched, staring out at the yard, at the garage. For weeks, everything had been building toward this moment. Derek's pressure, Heather's fear, Sharon's quiet strategy, Walter's warning sitting like a steady voice in the back of my mind. Now it was time to stop watching. Time to act. Sharon arrived first right on time, as she always did. She carried a folder this time, not thick, not dramatic, just enough to hold what mattered. You ready? She asked as she stepped inside. I nodded. Yes. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't uncertain. I was clear. That was the difference. A few minutes later, the doorbell rang. Derek, Heather, and no one else this time. No attorney. No clipboard. No attempt to make this look like anything other than what it was. Personal. Final. I opened the door. Derek stepped in first, his posture rigid, his expression controlled but tight around the edges. Heather followed quieter than before, her eyes briefly meeting mine before dropping away. Mom Derek said, Derek! No smiles, no softening. We moved into the living room, the same room where he had tried to reshape me. Now it felt different. Balanced. He noticed Sharon immediately. Again. And this time he didn't hide his irritation. Still bringing backup, he asked. Still trying to take control. Sharon replied calmly. The air sharpened instantly. "Let's not do this," Derek said, his voice tightening. "We're here to talk." "Then talk," I said. We sat. Derek didn't wait. "I don't want to drag this out," he said. "We both know what this is about." "Yes," I replied. "We do." He leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly together. "I need you to work with me on this," he said. "Not against me. Work with him," as if this were a shared problem. "What does that look like?" I asked. "You sign the paperwork," he said. "We move forward. We get things under control." There it was again. Control. Always control. "And the garage?" I asked. His jaw tightened. "That's part of it." "Part of it," I repeated. Heather shifted slightly beside him but didn't speak. I let a moment pass. Then I reached for the folder Sharon had brought and placed it on the table between us. "I think we should be very clear about what this is," I said. Derek frowned slightly. "What are you talking about?" I opened the folder. Inside were copies. The letter, the documents, the messages, the recording device. Everything. "I think we should stop pretending this is about my well-being," I continued. His eyes flicked down to the folder, then back to me. "What is this?" he asked. "This," I said calmly, "is everything you hoped I wouldn't see." The room went still. I picked up Walter's letter first. "You asked me to trust you," I said, "but your father asked me to understand you." I slid the letter across the table. Derek didn't touch it. "You should read it," I added. "I don't need to read it," he said quickly. No, he didn't want to. I let that sit. Then I reached for the next set of papers. "These," I said, "are the documents your father left behind. The ones that explain exactly how the garage and everything in it is protected. Carlton wasn't there to explain it this time. But he didn't need to be. I had already learned enough. You can't access anything without my direct, willing consent," I continued, "and if there's any sign of coercion—" I let the sentence trail off. Derek's expression shifted. "Just slightly, but enough. You lose access entirely," I finished. Heather inhaled sharply. She knew. She had seen enough to understand. Derek's gaze snapped to her, then back to me. "That's not—" "It is," Sharon said quietly. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Derek's composure cracked further. "You're twisting this," he said. "That's not what I'm doing." "No," I asked. I reached for the small recording device and placed it on the table. His eyes locked onto it. "What's that?" he demanded. I pressed a button. His voice filled the room. "It's not just sitting there. It's something that could actually fix things. Liquidity, leverage, options. You're sitting on access." The words hung in the air. Unavoidable. Uneditable. His own voice. Derek's face went pale. "Turn that off," he said sharply. I didn't. I let it play for just a few more seconds. Then I stopped it. Silence. Heavy. Final. "That's not concern," I said. "That's pressure." His jaw tightened. "You don't understand. I understand perfectly." I cut in. Then I reached for the phone. Heather's phone. The messages she had shown me. Now printed. Documented. Unavoidable. I slid them across the table. "Read those," I said. He didn't move. But Heather did. Her hands trembled slightly as she looked down. She didn't need to read them again. She already knew. Derek stared at the papers, then at her. "You showed her," he said. Heather didn't answer. "That was answer enough." "You said you wanted to help me," I said quietly. But this isn't help. I tapped the papers lightly. This is a plan, step by step. Keys, control, narrative, legal authority. Everything laid out. Derek stood abruptly, his chair scraping back. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "You're making it sound like I'm some kind of criminal." "No," I said calmly. I met his eyes. "I'm describing exactly what you did." The words landed clean. No anger, no exaggeration, just truth. He looked at me like he didn't recognize me, and in a way he didn't, because I wasn't the woman he had been trying to reshape anymore. I was trying to fix things, he said, his voice tightening. I was trying to keep everything from falling apart. At my expense, I replied. At our expense, he shot back. There it was. The belief. The justification. The entitlement Walter had seen years before I did. "This isn't yours to fix," I said. His eyes flashed. "It affects me." "Yes," I said. "It does." I didn't deny that. "But that doesn't give you the right to take control of my life to solve it." The same truth. Stronger now. Backed by proof. By clarity. By everything he had tried to avoid. The room fell quiet again. Not tense. Not uncertain. Settled. Because there was nothing left to argue. Nothing left to hide. Derek's breathing was uneven now. His composure gone, replaced by something raw and frustrated and desperate. For a moment I saw it. The boy he had been. The man he had become. And the distance between them. "You're really going to do this?" he asked. "Do what I replied. Stand in my way." The words were quiet, but they carried everything. I held his gaze. "I'm not standing in your way," I said. "I'm standing in my own." That was the difference. Not opposition. Boundary. Derek looked at me for a long time. Then slowly something shifted in his expression. Not understanding. Not regret. Something colder. "Fine," he said. One word. Flat. Controlled again, but different now. Harder. "You've made your choice." "Yes," I said. "I have." He nodded once, then turned and walked toward the door. Heather hesitated, just for a second, then followed him. The door closed behind them, and the house fell silent again. But this time, it wasn't heavy, it wasn't uncertain, it was clear. Because the truth had been spoken, out loud, in full, and there was no going back from that. After the door closed, I didn't move right away. I sat there in the quiet, the folder still open on the table, the echo of Derek's last words lingering in the air like something unfinished. "You've made your choice." Yes, I had, and for the first time in weeks that choice didn't feel heavy. It felt right. Sharon reached over and gently closed the folder, her movements calm, deliberate. "You handled that exactly the way you needed to," she said. I exhaled slowly, the tension I hadn't fully noticed finally loosening in my chest. "It doesn't feel like a victory," I admitted. "It's not supposed to," she replied. "It's a boundary. A boundary. Not a win. Not a loss. A line." And I had finally drawn it. The days that followed moved quickly. Not dramatically, but decisively. Sharon helped me take the next steps, ones that felt less like reaction and more like reclaiming something I had never actually lost, just momentarily doubted. We changed the locks. Not because I believed Derek would break in again, but because I knew he had already crossed that line once. And boundaries once set need to be protected. We contacted an attorney, someone Sharon trusted, someone who specialized in elder law. Not to escalate things unnecessarily, but to make sure everything was formally documented. Clear. unquestionable, protected. I agreed to a voluntary medical evaluation as well, not because I needed to prove anything to Derek, but because I wanted to remove every possible angle he might try to use against me. The results came back exactly as I expected. Fully competent, fully capable, fully in control of my own decisions. Seeing it written down didn't change how I felt about myself, but it closed a door Derek had been trying to pry open, and that mattered. A week later, I got my keys back. Not from Derek, from the evaluation center where I had driven myself without hesitation. The simple act of holding them again, feeling their weight in my hand, felt different now, stronger. Not because I had lost them, but because I had almost been convinced I didn't deserve them. I stood in the driveway for a moment, the late afternoon sun warming my face, the house behind me quiet and steady. Then I looked toward the garage. For so long it had been the center of everything Derek wanted. Now it felt like something else. Not a target, not a prize, a responsibility. One I understood clearly now. Derek didn't come back right away. For several days there was nothing. No calls, no messages, no attempts to explain or apologize, just silence. And I let it stay that way, because sometimes silence is exactly what needs to exist after truth has been spoken. Then one evening his car pulled into the driveway again. I saw it through the window before he knocked. This time I didn't feel tension, just awareness. I opened the door. Derek stood there, his posture different than before. Less controlled. More worn. "Mom," he said. His voice was quieter, not softer, just less certain. "Derek." We stood there for a moment, neither of us stepping forward. Then he spoke. "I didn't come to argue," he said. "That's good," I replied. "I came to talk." I nodded slightly and stepped aside. "Come in." We sat in the living room again, the same space where everything had unraveled. Now it felt settled. Not healed, but settled. Derek didn't start right away. He looked around the room, his gaze lingering on small things, the photos, the furniture, the familiar pieces of a life he had once been part of without question. "I didn't think it would get this far," he said finally. I didn't respond. I let him continue. "I thought I could fix it," he said, "before it became a real problem." "It already was a real problem," I said quietly. He nodded. "I know that now." There was a pause. Then he looked at me. "I messed up," he said. The words were simple, direct, but something was missing. Not sincerity, something deeper. Responsibility. "You didn't just mess up," I replied. "You made a series of choices." He flinched slightly at that. "I was under pressure," he said. "I know. I didn't have options." "You did," I said. "You just didn't like them." That landed. "Because it was true." Derek leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly together. "I wasn't trying to hurt you," he said. "I believed that, in a limited way." "I know," I said. He looked up, surprised. "But you were willing to," I added. "That was the difference. Intent doesn't erase impact." Silence settled between us again. He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know how to fix this," he admitted. That at least sounded honest. And for a brief moment I saw him. Not the man who had tried to control me. Not the son I had remembered. But someone in between. Lost. Cornered. Still trying to figure out how to stand without taking something from someone else. "You don't fix it by asking me to solve your problems," I said. I'm not. You are, I interrupted gently. Even now. He stopped. Because he heard it. Finally. I can't be the solution to what you created, I continued. The words were steady, clear, not harsh, but firm. Derek looked down, his jaw tightening. So that's it, he asked. You're just done. Done, as if this were something I could simply close. I'm not done being your mother, I said. He looked up. But I am done being something you can manage, I added. That was the line, the boundary, the truth. He sat there for a long moment absorbing it. Then he nodded slowly, not in agreement, not fully, but in recognition. I need time, he said. So do I replied. That was the closest thing to understanding we had reached in weeks. Not resolution, not forgiveness, just space. Derek stood. This time there was no anger, no sharp edges, just distance. I'll figure something out, he said. I didn't respond to that, because that part was his responsibility, not mine. He walked to the door, then paused. For what it's worth, he said without turning around, I didn't think you'd push back like that. I almost smiled. Neither did I said. He nodded once. Then he left. The door closed quietly behind him, and I stood there in the stillness of the house, the weight of everything that had happened settling into something calmer, something steadier. Because this time, I hadn't been pushed into a decision. I had made one, and I hadn't lost anything. I had taken something back. In the weeks after Derek's last visit, life didn't return to what it had been before. It became something else. Quieter in some ways, clearer in others. There were no more sudden knocks at the door, no more carefully worded phone calls that felt like they carried hidden agendas. Derek kept his distance just as he had said he would. Occasionally, there would be a short message, neutral, restrained, almost formal. Hope you're doing well. Let me know if you need anything. I always responded, I'm fine. I hope you are too. Nothing more. Because sometimes distance is the only honest shape a relationship can take for a while. Heather sent a message once as well. Longer, more uncertain. She told me she had moved out temporarily, that she needed space to think to protect Ava from the tension that had filled their home. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't try to justify anything. She just said she was trying to do better. I believed her. Not completely, but enough. The garage, however, was something I no longer avoided. If anything, I found myself drawn to it. Not out of obligation, out of intention. One morning I walked out there with a cup of coffee in hand, just as I had done years ago when Walter was still alive. The air was cool, the sky clear, the kind of day that made everything feel quietly possible. I opened the door and stepped inside. The smell greeted me again, but it no longer felt like a shock. It felt familiar, welcoming. I moved through the space, slowly touching things as I went. The workbench, the shelves, the small radio that still sat where Walter had left it. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was intruding. I felt like I was continuing something. I pulled the canvas back from the car again, more fully this time. It was beautiful. Even unfinished, even worn by time, there was something undeniable about it. The lines, the structure, the care that had gone into bringing it this far. Walter hadn't just been working on a machine. He had been building something with patience, with pride. And he had trusted me with what came next. That realization didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt grounding. I wasn't standing in the middle of someone else's plan. I was standing in the middle of my own choice. With Sharon's help and the attorney she had introduced me to, I began the process of understanding exactly what Walter had left behind, not just the car, everything connected to it. The documentation was thorough, detailed, organized in a way that made it possible to trace every step of the restoration, every part sourced, every expert consulted. Walter hadn't left anything unfinished in terms of preparation, just the work itself. So I made a decision. Not quickly, not impulsively, but clearly. I would finish what he started. Not alone. I wasn't foolish enough to think I could take on a project like that without help, but with the right people, the right guidance, the right intention. People who respected the work, not just its value. Over the next few months, I worked with a small team of specialists, individuals. Sharon helped me find people who understood restoration not as a quick profit, but as a craft. I was there for every step, not because I needed to control it, but because I wanted to understand it, to honor it, to see it through. And slowly, piece by piece, the car came back to life, not just as an object, but as something that carried meaning. Walter's time, his skill, his quiet determination, and now mine. When it was finally complete, I stood in the garage and looked at it in a way I hadn't been able to before. Not as something hidden, not as something contested, but as something finished, whole. The decision about what to do with it came just as clearly. I didn't keep it, and I didn't rush to sell it either. I made sure it was evaluated properly, documented thoroughly, and handled in a way that respected what it was. And when the time came, I let it go. Not out of pressure, not out of fear, but because I chose to. The proceeds were more than enough to secure my future comfortably, but that wasn't the part that mattered most. What mattered was what I did next. I set aside a portion of it to create something in Walter's name, a small scholarship fund, nothing extravagant, but meaningful. Focused on students pursuing hands-on trades, automotive work restoration, craftsmanship. Young people who were willing to build something real with their hands. The kind of work Walter had always respected. The kind of work Derek had once admired. Before things changed, the garage didn't stay the same after that. I didn't turn it into storage again, and I didn't leave it untouched. I transformed it. Not completely, but enough. The workbench stayed. The shelves stayed. The structure stayed. But the space became lighter, less like a place holding the past, more like a place that had carried something through to completion. Sometimes I still go out there in the mornings with a cup of coffee. I stand where Walter used to stand. I listen to the quiet, and I think. Not just about what happened, but about what it meant. Because the truth is, the garage was never just about the car, and it was never just about the money. It was about something much harder to see, something Derek needed but never understood. Control, a way out, a shortcut through consequences he didn't want to face. But what was really in that garage was a boundary, a protection. A final act of love from a man who had seen what I hadn't been ready to see. And a chance for me to decide who I would be when it finally mattered. I still see Derek occasionally. Not often, but enough. He's quieter now, more measured. The edges are still there, but they're not as sharp. We talk about simple things. Weather, Ava. Small pieces of life that don't carry weight. We don't talk about the garage, or the meeting, or what happened. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Some things don't need to be revisited to be understood. What matters is this. He knows where I stand, and I know where I do. Sometimes people ask me if I regret it, if I wish I had handled things differently, if I would have done more to help him. I always think about that for a moment before I answer. Because the question itself is honest, but the answer is too, no. I don't regret protecting myself. I don't regret drawing a line, and I don't regret refusing to solve a problem that wasn't mine to carry, because in the end, I didn't lose my son. He didn't lose me. What we lost was the version of our relationship that depended on me giving up parts of myself to keep the peace. And what we have now is something quieter, less certain, but more honest. And sometimes that's the only kind of relationship that can survive. There's a kind of control that doesn't look like control at first. It sounds like concern. It feels like help. It's wrapped in words like safety, support, and just for now. But over time, if you listen closely, you start to notice what's really happening. You're not being helped. You're being reduced, piece by piece, until someone else is holding your choices in their hands. Growing older doesn't mean giving that up. It doesn't mean handing your life over to someone else just because they speak with confidence, and it doesn't mean that love requires surrender. Real help doesn't take your dignity. Real love doesn't rush you, and real family doesn't need to make you feel small to feel in control. Sometimes the hardest thing you will ever do is stand in front of someone you love and say no, not out of anger, not out of pride, but out of respect for yourself. If you've ever been in a situation where help felt more like control, I'd truly like to hear your story. What would you have done in my place? And wherever you're watching from, tell me your city, your country, and what time it is right now. It reminds us that we're all connected even in moments that feel isolating. If this story stayed with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. You never know who might need to hear something like this today.